Welcome to All Things Greater Burlington, where you will hear from the movers, shakers, and changemakers that are moving Greater Burlington forward. Here is your host, Stephen Brody.
Welcome to All Things Greater Burlington. Wildlife Lakes Elk Farm is located in southeast Iowa, about 10 minutes from the mighty Mississippi River and very close to the city limits of Burlington, Iowa. They have been raising elk for over 30 years, and they decided the best way to enjoy wildlife on a daily basis would be to raise animals and waterfowl on and around many man-made ponds and lakes. The folks at Wildlife Lakes actually started with breeding giant Canadian geese and soon added mule deer to their collection. The mule deer were soon replaced with 5 elk heifers and a yearling elk bull, and what do you know, they were on their way to being in the elk business. They get hundreds and thousands of fall and winter visitors that stop by for a safe haven for the evening and night, and then usually will take flight and continue their journey the following morning. And they're now working in cooperation with the Iowa Department of Natural Resources on the Iowa Trumpeter Swan Project. That sounds really interesting. And so looking forward to delving into this today with Henry Bohlen with Wildlife Elks Farm. And Henry, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Looking forward to learning all things wildlife elks. Tell us again, what was the fascination with getting into this 30 years ago?
Well, we've always liked wildlife, as you mentioned, and I've hunted a lot, but not elk, mostly birds. But anyway, the mule deer were on our property, but they are so wild and crazy to handle that they kill themselves, really hitting fences and jumping. And so we switched to elk. The elk business was just getting rolling then. And we switched to elk, and they are probably the easiest. Of all the wild animals, they're probably the easiest to domesticate, you might say. They're still wild.
Yeah.
But our animals are all raised from day one. I've been around them. They've been around me, and they have a lot of traffic by, a lot of noise. So they're actually a whole different kind of animal, you might say, compared to most people that have elk behind fence. So they're a lot more calm.
Henry, as far as you know, have elk always been around here? I honestly would just always just think of deer, but has elk been a popular animal in this area?
No, they were native here, and they find elk artifacts, bones and teeth and a lot of things with the Indian artifacts.
Okay.
And they were shot out by the natives and the settlers probably. And actually, white-tailed deer didn't really come into this area until probably the early 50s.
Wow. Okay.
And then they were very prevalent now, of course, and there's a lot of problems with them with car accidents and whatever.
Yeah.
But the elk industry was... Most people didn't realize what really drove the industry, and the thing that drove it was the antlers, antler market.
Okay.
And the South Korea was buying our antlers. They were taken off the head at 70 to 75 days growth, and they've used them for medicinal purposes.
Interesting.
For over 2,000 years.
Yeah. Do you know, for example, what type of medicinal purposes?
Well, some of the things we know about are the arthritic medicines and the glucosamines and the chondroitins. And we had when I keep saying I'm talking about our national association.
Uh-huh.
Back then, and 4 years after we started, we had up to 1,700 members in our national association. And then we had 150 members in Iowa at one time.
Yeah.
Raising elk, but it was relatively new then, real new for people to even have elk behind fence.
Yeah.
And so it's progressed from there up and then back down some. But the antlers then were worth taken off the head at 75 days growth, approximately, kept frozen because they're still growing, and sold to the Koreans and some Chinese, but it was over $100 a pound.
Oh my gosh!
So a bull that would cut 15 pounds or 30 pounds, and there were some then 30 plus. Well, there's $1,500 to $3,000 a year off of that bull's head.
Yeah.
Every year for 8-10 years, and then sell them for to the hunting farms. Mm-hmm. So it was a very exciting business.
Yeah.
Very exciting.
How does Iowa compare, would you say, with other states in terms of an elk population? Because again, I wouldn't necessarily think Iowa. I would always think, more in the plains areas, perhaps.
Are you talking about wild or behind fence?
Well, you tell me.
There's no wild elk in Iowa,
okay,
unless they just happen to migrate in or through.
Okay.
And we're not. We used to be, like I said, we used to have 150 members. But it's gone down dramatically. The most populated state, and I don't know if they have any wild elk in Minnesota, but they were probably the biggest farm state of all. They're probably bigger than any other 3 states, elk farms.
Mm-hmm.
But things have turned around there quite a bit. The government regulations,
yeah.
So they're going down pretty fast in numbers.
And when you say behind fence, how big of an area are we talking about?
That varies dramatically. We have probably 80 acres behind fence that are enclosed.
Yeah.
So we have plenty of room for the animals that we have. So they're not concentrated on. The biggest problem people have is buying some animals and they only got a few acres fenced, and pretty soon they got way more animals than they should have.
Yeah. And
then they have disease problems because of their concentration. And but if you're talking about enclosures for hunting, for example, there's enclosures in some of the western states that are 5,000 acres.
Yeah.
And of course, Texas is known for huge enclosures.
Yeah.
And of course, down there, they're mostly exotics.
Mm-hmm.
But our animals here raised now, almost all the animals, males that are raised now, or go to these hunting facilities. And the most interesting was, and everybody thinks, and there is a lot of hunting in the wild, so-called wild openings in Colorado, but Colorado imports more bulls for hunting than any other state.
Okay.
Right now.
Interesting.
But it's a whole different game there.
How do the elks make their way then to those hunting farms? They're like, I would imagine there's like big trailers.
There'll be just livestock trailers. Mm-hmm. And there's some people that haul elk professionally that can load in. They all have to be separate. When you're hauling elk in antlers, bull antlered, you can't put them together because they'll kill each other.
Yeah.
But so if you got a trailer to hold 8 or 10 bulls, they have to have a separate pen for every one of them. So you put one in, close the gate, put another, close the gate. And they haul them clear out of Canada for that too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you take care of an elk? What type of care and treatment or food, for that matter, do you have to do?
Well, the feeding, there's a lot of similarities to elk in many ways to cattle.
Okay.
Nutrition, they're the only difference between them and most other animals, they need a lot of copper.
Copper?
Yep.
Really?
And they get copper in the wild from the browse, the leaves and the twig and the bark. They don't get that behind fence if there's not a lot of trees in that area, and that happens all the time. And if there are some trees, there'll probably end up not being any because they'll eat the bark off, and then those trees will die.
Yeah. So
we have to add copper to our feed, and that's a real critical thing. Other than that, they typically eat. They like corn, and oats. They're fed usually every day. Ours are fed by hand.
Yeah.
Not very many people feed them with self-feeders, so they don't overeat. But then they eat a lot of hay and grass.
Yeah.
So the only ones that they get much grain in our case are the bulls for the antler growth, which is starting right now, by the way. And that is amazing how fast that grows. Most of that whole set of antlers grows in about 16 weeks.
Yeah.
And it could be 40, 50 pounds even. So we can't feed the cows much because if they get overweight, they have calving problems.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now you've got a lot of acreage out there. So are you growing a lot of the food and the grain to feed the animals, or are you having to obtain those from other sources?
Well, we would have that. We would have the grain. We have enough acres that we could grow it, but typically when you order it from a elevator, time you get everything mixed together and all, it probably just doesn't end up being our own grain.
Yeah. And then when you have to go and get food sources from outside, are you able to find sources from Iowa or to get that, or do you have to go?
Yeah,
okay.
Local elevators. Ours happen to come from Iowa City.
Oh, that's good. You don't have to go too far.
Yeah,
then.
They bring it in trucks.
On average, Henry, is there a typical duration as to how long you have an elk at your farm before it gets shipped off somewhere?
Well, typically the bulls are sold for hunting when they get up, so their antlers are valued. They're sold by the score of the antler. Mm-hmm. So typically 5-6 years.
Okay.
And then they get a little harder to be handled also at that age. So most of the bulls are gone. Sometimes we've had them 8 years old.
So they'll be birthed where you're at.
Oh, yeah.
And you could have them as long as 5-6 years, maybe a little bit longer.
At least 5 to 6.
Okay.
The cows longer than that.
Yeah.
Yeah, the cows can then go 10, 15 years pretty easily.
Okay.
And then you want to keep some around. If you have visitors, you want some that somebody could pet once in a while.
Yeah.
We had a group in just Saturday. You have younger kids. They all got to pet an elk on the head at least.
Yeah, so let's talk about that for a moment, because obviously there's that business side of raising the elk for hunting purposes, but there is a lot that takes place there in terms of tours where folks can come out. Can you share with us again the type of things that people can see and enjoy if they want to come out and take a tour?
Well, we have individual or family groups come out, and we occasionally have big bus tours come in. We had one just Saturday they were all from younger kids. I'm not sure what the group was, but there was 40 kids and 11 chaperones or parents. I'm not sure which.
Yeah.
And so what we typically do is take them up in my office, our room. It's big and it's a little crowded with that 50, but it's can be put done. They can put them in there, and we talk about, show them the antlers, tell them what the industry's about, why we raise elk, and then we take them out. In this case, put them back on the tour bus and drive them to where the elk are, and then I go in and feed the elk, and then the one pen we can take them right in and let them pet an elk at the gate only. We don't want them in with them.
Okay.
They could react the wrong way, but usually the elk will run away. But we've got some cows that are not bottle fed, but they're similar to that, and they come right up to the gate to eat. Of course, speed helps.
Yes.
Yeah.
So are you typically then responsible for doing the feeding? Do you let any of the guests feed as well, or did you say? Well, they'll pet but not feed.
Yeah, we don't want them to go in with the the older animals.
Yeah,
and the younger ones are scared, so they run away usually.
Okay, yeah. Okay.
And then we work with Harvest Host in relation to visitors. Harvest Host is a company out of Colorado that has a big website. And if you're an RVer, they have like 3,500 or some large number of hosts like ourselves across the United States.
Oh, okay.
Where an RVer can come in. You pay them $99 a year. They give you access to where all these hosts are. And we've probably had 100 to 125 groups in the last few years.
Nice.
They come in, they stay all night down by our lodge in their own camper. But the agreement is they can stay all night for nothing. No hookups. But then they come up the next morning, and I take them right in with me to feed.
Nice.
I put them in my Kawasaki mule. So if the bulls are in it, if they're in rut yet, so I put them in the mule, and then they're not obligated, but most of them buy some product. They're obligated. They're all but obligated to buy some product. That in our case, they buy elk meat. for the bison that we have. We don't raise bison, but we have the meat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So do you have a store there, Henry?
Well, it's a building. It's a big building where my son functions out of with his business.
Yeah.
But we have a room upstairs that has all the meat products and has a lot of photographs and samples of whatever. And so we meet there usually first, and then we can go out and feed the animals.
What type of products could folks purchase in there?
Well, anywhere from dog chews. That's a big market now.
Yeah.
For the antlers. That the market that we discussed earlier in South Korea, we lost that and didn't lose it completely. But when a lot of people have not heard of chronic waste, there is a disease called chronic waste.
Yes. Yes.
And it has some similarities to mad cow, which everybody's heard about.
Yeah.
And when that hit, South Korea shut our imports off.
Oh.
And the price of antler went from over $100 to $5. So that's when I'm eased off into the meat business. And so we have about every cut that you would think about available that would be similar to a beef. We have ribeyes, New York strips, sirloins, pastrami, ground patties, and work with a number of places. The Drake here in town does a lot of our meat.
Yeah.
The Broadway in West Burlington does. Jerry's Main Lunch does. Then we have convenience stores around that do our elk sticks and summer sausage and jerky.
Is a lot of that processed on site, or do you send that off somewhere else to prepare?
It has to be. It all is processed in Riverside.
Okay.
Just a second exit south of Iowa City.
Yeah.
And they do a tremendous job for us. Yeah, anything you sell has to be state inspected or federal, but they have to. Iowa's mostly state inspected meat.
That's a good question that I was going to ask. I know, and I want to ask about the trumpeter swan. I also want to talk about the Canadian geese, but working with the DNR obviously is very important for what you do. So on a daily basis or an annual basis, what do you have to do with the DNR to make sure, I guess, that everything that you're doing is up to snuff, is doing what you're supposed to be doing according to them?
Well, in relation to the elk, the DNR is not very involved. They are involved in the hunting enclosures. They're not involved in ours. We work with the state vet department or people for any health problems with them, but they're also, then the DNR can get involved. With the trumpeter swans, they're the ones that were the promoters for the restoration of the swans. See, the swans, 20 years back, there was hardly any swans left flying in the whole United States. They were all behind fence and pinioned. They couldn't fly.
Uh-huh.
So the state of Iowa, state of Minnesota, Wisconsin put a tremendous effort into bringing them back. And we were one of the cooperative breeders. And in order to be one of the breeders, you had to have an enclosure because the swans that you were raising to be released later had to be contained so they didn't walk away. If they can't fly, they're going to walk.
Okay.
So since we already had this enclosure, which was really, believe it or not, for the Canadian geese, which now are a pest almost, and some places they are.
Oh.
But anyway, we got involved with the trumpeters there in that situation. You had to keep the water open with an aerator for them, so they'd have water all year round, and you had to feed them. So we were ready to do all that, and we were with them for quite a few years.
Were some already around, or did you have to introduce them to where you were?
No, they were brought in.
Okay.
Minnesota and Wisconsin both, to get some of the wild instinct back into the swans, they had an agreement with the Fish and Wildlife in Alaska, and they found corporate jet people had corporate jets and were willing to go fly them up there with incubators in the jet.
Really?
And they'd go out with helicopters and get an egg or two out of wild nests and shuttle them back to the incubator.
Uh-huh.
And then they'd bring them back and hatch them here. And that's how a lot of it started.
Okay.
The only swans that were flying then of any number were flying out of Alaska into the Yellowstone for the winter. And that got to be a problem. And they tried to get them to go to Oregon. And that's a real challenge when you want to change the flight pattern. But
yeah.
But anyway, they think there's 10 to 15,000 wild swans now in Minnesota.
Okay.
But we had this winter, we had up to 200 and 300 in at night on the lake by the lodge on the highway there.
Yeah.
So that part got involved. When we were on the restoration project, there was a county pond behind the old county home, and there was a Kevin Gahn guy died young, and they used some of the money to buy a pair of swans to put on that lake. Well, they kept having problems taking care of it. They'd have to drive clear down from Spirit Hollow, not Spirit Hollow, a Big Hollow.
Yeah.
To take care of them. So they said, I said, why don't we put them on the lake by the highway where I can see them every day?
Mm-hmm.
So they only had the females. I leaned on the DNR then to find a male.
Uh-huh.
So we've had a hatch there every year since. So we have let 74 young ones go out of there now. That we just let them fly.
Yeah.
And then they're bringing their friends back in the winter.
No kidding.
And so that's why we think that's the main reason we're getting a lot of birds in there. And there'll be some days 300 on that 23-acre lake. That lake's there because of the highway project.
Yeah.
It's what the highway called the Borrow Pit.
So those geese or swan, they communicate. They let their friends know where it's a good place to hang out, huh?
Oh yeah. Yeah, and they make a lot of noise.
Do they?
But the swans are, and then we had a problem with them hitting the eye lines. Our biggest loss for swans is eye lines, lead shot, and lead sinkers off fisherman lines.
Yeah.
And high lines. Well, I called Alliant, and Tracy McCampbell, I don't know if you know Tracy or not.
Uh-huh.
He said, we're going to help you out. If you go down the Sunset Drive right now, you'll see probably 30 to 40 twirlers on the high lines. They're there just so those swans know that that's a problem.
Okay.
We lost 4 before that. We were there. We haven't lost any that we know of since they've been marked.
Do the swans and the geese get along with each other?
Only in the wintertime. And come spring now, everybody's got to leave that lake but one pair of swans. And they will leave these mallard ducks alone. They don't bother them, but they don't want any swans there, other swans, and they don't want any geese there at all.
Yeah.
They chase them out.
So tell me again the time frame as to when you start seeing them show up. How long do they stick around, and then when you start seeing them take off again?
What, the swans?
Either the swans
geese?
or the geese.
Well,
yeah.
the geese are around here most year round.
Okay.
And since the swans are not chasing them out of there yet, there's still quite a few geese on the lake.
Yeah.
By the 4-lane there. But the swans are most of the swans have left that area, but I don't know where they go.
That's curious because you always hear, growing up, all the geese, whatever, they're always flying south for the winter, right? But yet you said that you have some that are here for the winter. Well,
there's a lot of open water with the generating plant south of town.
Uh-huh.
The water, West Burlington has, where they have their sewage clean water treatment plant.
Yeah.
There's water there.
Yeah.
There's a lot of lakes. This year we had a lot of open time out of them. So I don't know where they come from because we see them out in the fields north and west of Danville and north of Danville both. sometimes 150 in a group.
Yeah.
They do feed some. They naturally feed off the bottom, most of all, but they do eat corn.
Yeah.
So we have special feeders for them. The feeders are blocked up so they can reach, the swans can reach the feed, but the geese can't, or the ducks. Otherwise, they'd eat it all.
You've been there for 30 years or so. Is there anything, Henry, that you think people don't know about the Wildlife Elks Farm that, like, hey, we do this, but don't you realize that? Or you think everyone's got a pretty good idea of?
No, there's a lot of people that when they come out and they said, well, we had no idea you could buy elk meat here or see an elk even.
Yeah.
If they don't happen to see them when they go by on the 4-lane, they don't realize they're there. No, that's what amazes us the most. So it's back to advertising again.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. How do the other areas around the country know about you? Like when you were talking earlier about, sending the elk out to the hunting farms.
Yeah.
I guess. How do you get connected with those places that they know that you're around and that you're a source?
Well, we're on the internet with wildlifelakes.com.
Yeah.
That's our website. And so if you dial in elk Southeast Iowa, you're gonna find our place. There's another one south down by Port Madison that might show up.
Yeah.
That's not as big as it was. The person that was running that got killed. But anyway, the internet is significant. Then we have an Iowa Association of elk breeders, and we have a national association. So by being connected with those three, with the internet, Iowa Association, the National Association, there's a lot of communication back and forth. Then people finally find out that once they find that you have elk, we get calls continually looking for bulls for hunting farms.
Okay.
And there's a lot of those around, more than most people would realize.
Yeah.
And they're not, some people call it canned hunting or behind fence, but when you got a few thousand acres to put a bull on, if it's very heavily wooded, you might not be able to find him even.
Yeah. Well, forgive me if I use the wrong terminology, but with all that you're involved with, are any of those still considered endangered, or is there now a sufficient population that's around
for elk?
Elk, or
well, there's no the birds the swans are protected U.S. wide.
Okay.
Well, there may be. There's some swans that are hunted in, but not trumpeters, up in maybe some of the Dakotas, but most places they're protected everywhere.
Yeah.
The elk, there are states that have them, states that have reintroduced them. Missouri did just a few years ago. We question those very seriously. When I say we, our National Association, because they're getting elk that might have chronic waste and probably do, or they're carrying it, and they take them into these new states, and then they wonder why they have chronic waste.
Yeah.
But Kentucky has brought them in. Tennessee, probably at least a dozen states. So there's a few of them hunted, like in Pennsylvania. I don't know if Minnesota has any elk wild or not, but of course most of the northern states do.
Yeah.
And then all the western states, the worst ones, Washington and Oregon, they don't want anybody to hunt them or have them behind fence if they can. They're pretty negative about that.
Yeah.
I don't know why, but they are. And then there's the I can't remember the organization right now, but there's organizations that think we shouldn't have them behind fence at all. But no, it's pretty involved.
In the remaining moments that we have left, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask about the lodge and how do people get a chance to experience that, and what are those accommodations there? Well,
it's totally accommodated, if that's the word. It has everything you'd have in a house, with a small kitchen, and heat and air, And we don't advertise it, but the word of mouth is, we do rent it out on the weekends or a whole week. We have a guy coming today that's going to stay all week. And we have some hunters come in that stay there, and then they have a place, find places to hunt whitetails, not elk. But so it's just a matter of getting on the internet again and looking for our phone number, or I don't know. It's advertised some on the internet, but not really as a place to stay.
Do people look to it like as a romantic getaway even?
It's pretty unique, and in fact, it's on a 23-acre lake, and in the wintertime, and there's fishing there, and in the wintertime, you've got all kinds of birds. The bird watchers are coming down there all the time to count different birds, and there's people that just count birds every few weeks.
Yeah,
in the whole area, and they go down there with their big scopes and check, see how many different kind of ducks is there, and different kind of swans and Canadian or kind of geese. There's a lot of different kind of geese.
Yeah.
So it's it's a pretty popular place. It's rented probably half the time at least or more.
Are you content with what's going on there, or are you looking to do anything new
with the lodge?
With the property in and of itself, with the farm, or with everything that you got going on there, are you good, or are you thinking like, oh, I think we want to go in this direction. I think we want to maybe introduce this or do something to add to it.
Age becomes a limiting factor pretty fast. I was born in 1937, so things are getting a little bit different in order to start handling these 1,000-pound bulls,
Yeah.
Anyway, and we have a subdivision out there too, Wildlife Lakes, that's behind my house, and so that takes some time also. No, we aren't changing. We've cut back some on the number of animals.
Yeah.
But it's good. It's something good to work with, and they're a beautiful animal, and so are the. I tell people we have the most majestic animals and birds with those trumpeter swans of anybody.
Yeah,
and they are. So we aren't changing much. If I was a lot younger, I probably would.
Yeah.
That lake would make a tremendous campground. But it's a lot of things involved there.
Yeah. Are you open year round, or do you close at any time of year?
No, we're open year round.
So anybody can get a hold of you during the year.
Oh, yeah, anytime.
Very good.
Yeah.
You mentioned the website. Is there any other contact information you'd like to provide if people want to get a hold of you?
Well, phone number, if they want to write it down, it's 319-759-7548. We don't have phone books anymore.
Right.
So the websites are really the best source.
Yeah.
Of finding, and then of course our sign on the highway has our website on it.
Yeah,
and that's a good way. I'm going to probably put up a phone number out there too somewhere on that fence along there.
You do have a nice website. I was on this morning to look it up and get some information. So whoever put that together, they did a good job.
It has grown a little bit over the years. Yeah.
Well, Henry, thank you so much for coming in and sharing with us about Wildlife Lakes Elk Farm. I'm hoping that people, learn something that they didn't know more as they drive by and they see it. Now they have a better understanding, appreciation of it, and who knows, maybe you'll get an uptick in contacts and visits more so than you originally were planning on.
Well, we might.
Well, thanks again. Thanks again for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe wherever you listen to our podcasts, and give us a call at the Greater Burlington Partnership if you have any suggestions on any future guests that you'd like to hear. Until then, we'll see you next time on All Things Greater Burlington.
Have been listening to All Things Greater Burlington with Stephen Brody. Be sure to hit the subscribe button to catch all new episodes. To learn more about All Things Greater Burlington, visit greaterburlington.com/ATGB.